Get ready, world, because Activate Core presents the most epic global celebration of authorship yet. Welcome to the Virtual Book Tour 2025.
Greetings, my name is Diana Powell, and I am a holistic business coach, author, speaker, corporate trainer, and a founder of a number of businesses rooted in health, healing, education, and sustainable communities. But before those titles and professional roles, I will say that I'm someone shaped by story. My own story and those of people who came before me. I was born in North London, part of the first generation of my family born in the UK. That identity shaped me in powerful ways. I grew up watching the hard work and resilience of my Jamaican grandparents and parents who were pioneers of the Windrush era, and my grandparents came over to Britain, post-war Britain, in 1950s, and they had 12 children, including my mother, who they sent over, and they lived in North London. And my father, he did the same. He came over late 1950s as a young man with hopes and aspirations. Much of my work, whether it's coaching leaders or writing or delivering training programs, is grounded in the foundation of my family. When we were growing up in the UK, as a child, as a young person in 1970s, 1980s, we didn't see ourselves as British. We didn't see ourselves as Black British. We didn't see ourselves as what they term as an ethnic minority. We saw ourselves as Jamaicans. Our grandparents rooted us in Jamaican traditions, culture, value. Family was always important. Communities were always important. And family wasn't just blood. Family were people that grew up around you, that knew you from when you was young. And there was sometimes no distinction between blood and those people that who you grew around in a community, who you called aunties and uncles and cousins. Community shaped our ideals. Communities allowed us to see the world through a particular lens that was rooted in our story of how we saw the world and how we were able to navigate the world, and the aspirations that we had, not just for ourselves, but for our children and grandchildren. So much of my work today, whether it's coaching leaders, writing, or delivering training programs, are grounded in that foundation. And I believe in the power of lived experience. I believe in creating spaces where people can show up fully and to be their authentic self. I work across sectors, from boardrooms to grassroots, across continents. I've consulted in Africa, supported schools, mentored women, trained organizations in diversity, equality, and inclusion, and helped businesses align their values with vision. But at the heart of it all, I will say, is simple. My purpose in life, my alignment in this life, is to help people remember who they are and to be that best version of themselves, whatever that may be or mean to them. So my book that I'm here to talk about today, Afro in the Boardroom, was born from that narrative, that foundation of what it means to be rooted in your authentic self. Some of the pillars that are woven through this book looks at transformation. It looks at authenticity and intentionality. Afro in the Boardroom was born out of the desire to speak truth. my truth, from my perspective. Afro in the Boardroom is not going to be something that everyone's going to understand or even can relate to. It's for a particular type of person who can see the world through my lens, and I'm okay with that. I really am okay with that. Afro in the Boardroom is about understanding some of those tensions that exist when we try to bring ourselves into spaces where, we're not welcome, and spaces that were never really designed with us in mind. When I think about my writing journey, one person comes to mind is my mother. My mother, she loved to read. She loved to read those Mills and Boon books. She liked to read autobiographies. And she instilled in me a deep respect for knowledge and the importance of education, not just as a path to success, but as a way to understand the world and our place in it. Thinking back, it's funny. I never considered myself as a writer in the traditional sense. As a child, I didn't write poetry or stories, but I was always drawn to, like my mother, real people's lives. I loved reading biographies, especially around melanated women, change makers, leaders, those who faced hardship and turned it into purpose, their purpose in life. And I think that's where my fascination, you could say, with transformation and resilience really started. Later in life, I found myself constantly writing, interestingly enough, and but not in the way that people would usually imagine an author. I was writing business plans, strategic reports, funding proposals, and development frameworks for my clients and organizations that I worked for. I would pour hours into capturing their visions and their organization ideas, values, their bigger picture, and helping them to articulate their dreams and aspirations. And yet, I never thought to write a book for myself. I never thought about writing my own story. I never thought about documenting deeper reflections, those kind of silent moments of reflection and those hard-won wisdoms of life. So that shift in me started, I think, when someone actually approached me. It was one of my colleagues that was working with me on an initiative that supported entrepreneurs. And he said to me, his name was Dennis actually, and he said to me, why don't you write a book, a manual, a business manual? You've been in this game for a long, long time, and, I think you've earned your stripes. And, it's about legacy. It's about what can you leave behind that if you moved on, if you transitioned on, somebody or people will have this manual that was proven to work. And so we was tossing around with these ideas, and I attempted a few times actually to write a manual that reflected, the journey of leadership, a manual that helped people to navigate high pressure spaces and working for organizations and sitting in leadership roles, those manuals that we see a lot on the bookshelves. But it wasn't quite what I was actually gravitating to. I didn't want to write something that others have already written. I know it sounds a bit, because, you may say, well, okay, business is business. Is there certain rules and, but that's not what I really kind of gravitated towards. I started to reflect over my own journey in leadership. I started to look at some of those highs and lows along that journey and the feelings I had at times. And even so, people would consider me quite successful in those spaces and places. There are many times that I felt actually invisible. There were many times I would leave meetings with so much that I could have said that I didn't say. There were times where, in moments, things would happen that just didn't sit right with me. Things I observed, comments I'd received, instead of just brushing them off, they took root in my inner being. So from time to time, I will start to reflect, not just in my mind. I started to put pen to paper. Just for it wasn't intentionally to write a book. It was just as more of a reflection. And so when I had the conversation now about what I wanted to write, I was gravitating now to write a book through my lens of the world. To be able to give people that may, just don't understand their situations, and give clarity and perspective to what's being presented to them, and they're not really seeing what it is for what it is. So that's when I knew it was time to write Afro in the Boardroom. And it wasn't planned in any way. It wasn't structured in any particular way. I just wrote. I just wrote. And I remember I was in another meeting and I was talking also about the author journey. And, Afro in the Boardroom is my first, in bracket, book. And I think for me, it's just the whole process was quite therapeutic. Because sometimes I will sit in front of my laptop. I didn't even know what I was planning to write. Sometimes it would just be a blank screen, and then something would just come to me from my innate, and then I will start to write. And sometimes I'll start writing when the sun's up. And, you're so engrossed. I was so engrossed in what I was writing that I didn't realize that I was actually typing in the dark. So when I say writing, sometimes I interchange. I wasn't literally writing pen to paper. I was typing. And And when I type, sometimes my fingers just keep moving. They're just moving, and I'm just like I'm kind of zoned out now. And that was the beginning of that journey for me in Afro in the Boardroom. So in essence, Afro in the Boardroom is a story for melanated women or Black women in business. And it's about my journey. It's about my story. I've navigated a journey filled with triumphs, setbacks, and invaluable lessons that have shaped me as the woman, as the person I am today. I know what it means to be the only Black woman in the boardroom, to be underestimated and to constantly have to prove my worth. But I also know about the power of resilience, the power of strength, of community, and that force that comes from embracing one's identity unapologetically. Interwoven through each chapter, it speaks to the reader about transformation. Afro in the Boardroom speaks to the reader about authenticity. Afro in the Boardroom speaks to the reader about intentionality. For me, also, Afro in the Boardroom is my mother's voice. My mother, she transitioned in 2024, and Afro in the Boardroom is actually dedicated to her. And her sayings, her wisdom. And that's why I started out talking about the importance of family, community rooted in shared ideals and shared values that some could say, those communities are far and few in this day we're living in. So I also speak about the victories. Afro in the Boardrooms is, it's not just about my challenges. It's also about the victories. It's also about the wins. It's about the breakthroughs and the moments of success. I also speak about the triumphs and knowing and understanding your value. It's about stepping out in your full power. So Afro in the Boardroom is much more than my story. I'll say Afro in the Boardroom is a shared story. The title itself is a metaphor, and Afro represents my consciousness as a Black woman, a melanated woman, an African born in the diaspora. Afro represents my heritage, pride, and authenticity. As I mentioned, growing up, we never saw ourselves but as Jamaicans, but my family can take it back even further. On my father's side, we are rooted in the traditions of the Maroons. And the stories that we used to say around the fires of the warriors that fought the individuals that were, and the system of oppression in Jamaica during those times. And we speak about our Ghanaian traditions, and I hold that value even today. And so the boardroom symbolizes the world of business, a space where power is exercised, decisions are made, and opportunities are shaped. Because I didn't want my journey just to be rooted in the corporate space, because it wasn't. But as a leader, as a businesswoman, as an entrepreneur, we navigate places and spaces throughout our lives. And I see the symbolism of the boardroom as one where we can consider ourselves the CEO of our lives. And too often in these boardrooms, places and spaces, we are pressured to shrink ourselves to fit into these boardrooms, to straighten our edges, to conform to those expectations that was never meant for us. Afro in the boardroom is about rejecting those limitations. It's about showing up fully as ourselves and taking our rightful place in our boardroom and defining success on our terms. I am not a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, but, with my years in business, I understand the struggles of small business owners, of leaders, of entrepreneurs, because I've lived them. And to some extent, I still do. Every chapter of Afro in the Boardroom is rooted in something real. A conversation, a moment, a decision, a memory. My career has spanned, as I mentioned before, over 20 odd years, and I've sat in boardrooms. I've worked with policy leaders. I've stood in community halls delivering workshops. You name it, and they've all shaped me in different ways. I've seen what leadership looks like from top down. I've seen what transformation looks like from ground up. I've also seen how some of these biases, assumptions, and coded messages show up everywhere. So my writing of Afro in the Boardroom reflected some of these complex decisions and spaces and navigation. And as I said, it's not, I didn't want to write this book just about the downsides and the trauma, but I also wanted to show people how, you can show up and be successful. I bring to my work through Afro in the Boardroom a deeper understanding of intersectionality, culture, and identity. I've experienced what it means to be the first and only, and sometimes the last. I've experienced the joy of saying no more. And I really want my readers to have an understanding through my journey of exactly what that means. So readers to feel some of the core messages of Afro in the Boardroom. And it's about reclaiming some of those parts of ourselves that we were told to hide. Our hair, our tone, our culture, our brilliance. Afro in the Boardroom is about ending the performances and choose integrity instead. I talk about boundaries, especially in a culture where, in a culture that expects Black women to educate and explain and absorb and be strong for everybody, and it takes hard work. I speak about cultural intelligence and the realities of it. What is cultural intelligence? True inclusion What does that mean? What does it really mean in action? So Afro in the Boardroom is for those women who walk into the room and want something different in their lives. They want something, they want some answers. They want to be able to understand how to navigate the boardroom places and spaces. They want solutions. So after every chapter, there's a reflection on the boardroom, and I title it Lessons of the Boardroom, and it looks at the chapter from another perspective, because again, the journey I'm taking people down is the one of me navigating the business world. So through that navigation, there are lessons to be learned, lessons that I have learned myself, and what I want to share with my readers. So publishing Afro in a Boardroom, was actually deeply personal. I had a business, a writing coach, and she sometimes challenged me in a big way. Because when you're writing about your life story, my thing is how can you critique my life story? It's my life story. It's very personal, but she would look at the writing from the point of view of the reader, and whether I needed to give more clarity to the reader. Yes, it's very personal, but you also have people's lives in your hands. There are going to be people that's going to literally take every word that I write, literally word for word, and embrace word for word. So I got to get it right, and my writing coach is there to support me along that journey. And writing Afro in a Boardroom, was very, very personal, and very hard in some respect, because it kind of flagged up parts of my life that I actually locked away and I put it in a box, and I closed the box. But as I navigated the boardroom places and spaces, it would raise itself, not knowingly, but through the reflection of writing Afro in the Boardroom. I realized that some of my actions in my adult life were actually rooted in some of my formative years. So the biggest lesson for me, your story to always make room, for healing. Your own story, when in reflection, is about healing yourself. And what I want to give to my readers is also it's an opportunity for you to heal yourself. So where can you get Afro in the Boardroom? Afro in the Boardroom is on pre-order, and you can access that pre-order. You can access it www.dspowell.com, and it's on pre-order. It will be launched in the autumn. And there is also an opportunity to attend some of my webinars and mini training sessions. And there's also an opportunity to sign up, and you can get some nice freebies. So thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for taking that time to understand a little bit more about Afro in the Boardroom. And I thank